Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
I promise and will try my very best to be here on time next Sunday. Okay, we just have to make it clear that it is possible for a rich person to enter the reign of God. It's not impossible. It
Barely.
is possible. It's just kind of hard.
I can't believe your eye of the
That's
needle.
right.
Or to shoot,
That's right.
Or to shoot a whole
So,
lot of people.
be transformed. I think this is the message of our reading and the focus of our reflection this morning. Okay? So, a man described as rich by all the three synoptics, meaning Mark, Luke, and John. And then, Matthew describes this person as young. And then actually Luke also calls this person a ruler. But nevertheless, this young man, rich, ruler, asks Jesus what he must do to inherit eternal life. A pretty serious question, huh? But I think very deep and very sincere. By the way, eternal life and entering into life are both synonymous with the reign of God in biblical account. Mark 10:17, for example, states that the man ran up to him and fell on his knees before him. And then this rich young man or young ruler appears to be a sensible fellow. He came not to tempt Jesus, but to learn from him. This is the beauty of our reading this morning. So let's try to really extrapolate rather, the dynamics of this. In fact, he addressed Jesus as teacher, which is a title of respect. Which may also suggest that the question he raised to Jesus was really quite sincere. I would like to give this rich young man some credit for presenting himself and approaching Jesus in this manner. It is also clear that he believed in eternal life and wanted to attain it. He knew something must be done to attain this happiness. And for this rich young man, eternal life is not a game of chance or blind faith. And so as we continue to explore the story, let us remind ourselves that Jesus was saying here to a particular individual under a particular set of circumstances. We do not know exactly the background of this young man, his economic and political status in society, nor do we know his upbringing other than his being a rich young man or being a rich young ruler, according to Luke. The account seems silent about it. However, it is suggested that this young man is definitely not a Sadducee. Why? Because he believes in eternal life. Therefore, as one commentary says, some of Jesus' statements here in the story may not be globally or universally applicable to everyone. The question this young man asks presupposes a dissatisfaction and uncertainty in regard to what other teachers may have said to him. He appears to believe that one great deed will earn God's favor and gain him eternal life. Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? The young man tells Christ that he has kept the commandments since he was a child. What else should he do? Jesus does not contradict him. In Mark's account, it says, he looked at him and loved him. Perhaps Jesus saw that he was absolutely sincere in his efforts to abide by those commandments. But it also seems to appear that this rich young man is asking about the kind of commandments he must keep. He sounds like he was looking for specific examples. That's the translation, which ones? Rather than what sort of. If you notice on verse 18, yes, that's on verse 18. And so Jesus cites the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 5th commandments as well as the summary command, love your neighbor as yourself. That's actually in Leviticus 19:18. All these commands, if you notice, relate to interactions with neighbors, with fellow human beings. And the command to love your neighbors as yourself turns the man's attention from himself to others. In this dialogue, Jesus makes no mention of the commandments that relate to putting God first, possibly because he wanted to show the rich man's inadequacy in a more subtle way. Smart move, Jesus. The young man's question, what do I still lack? Shows his uncertainty and perhaps lack of assurance about being good enough for salvation. He consciously recognizes that he is still lacking something. I think that was very obvious in the reading. Although he had great wealth, he seems to suffer from a sense of emptiness. According to Hagner, one author, the commandments the rich young man was not obeying were those relating to worshiping God, such as the first and second commandment, and the summary command, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. As other authors also comment, Jesus demands not alms, but everything. However, the condition Jesus imposes on the man not only reveals his strong attachment to money, but also exposes the worthlessness of his formal compliance with the law. Thus, Jesus pointed out to the man in a subtle yet clear way that his God was really his earthly riches. Note that this verse does not teach that salvation can only be gained by selling or forsaking everything. No. The basic thrust, for example, of verse 21 is not sell your possessions and give to the poor, but rather come, follow me. The big question here is, what does following Jesus require? According to Carson, I made some really kind of interesting, references, because this is just way too dramatic. I mean, there's a lot of, it's a drama here. Jesus would not have made this point as well if he had just said, money is your God. That man's reaction proved correct. Jesus' statements, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's in Matthew 6:21. And no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. That's according to Matthew 6:24. A very black and white approach to your loyalty that reflects the strict sense of monotheism. We have to understand that as well. There's no sense of integrating. And I think this is now where I'm coming from personally, because I always try to see things in a where do they converge? Where do they overlap? But here it's very clear. The man leads because if a choice must be made between money and Jesus, most probably money wins. And the fact that the man grieved shows his conscience was alive. Okay? And he understood the choice he was making. To the young man's credit, he was not hypocritical. He did not pretend he could do this when he couldn't. He knew what this meant. Jesus' high standards and his own ambitions and desires just were incompatible. Being both thoughtful and well-intentioned, he went away sorrowful. My curiosity here is, what did he possess that had such a hold on him as to make him willing to walk away from eternal life? Huh? What was holding him back? What did he really trust in? There's nothing spiritually wrong with wealth itself. In fact, we take this as a blessing, as gift. We need wealth. Wellspring UCC needs money.
Well,
That's really true. The Bible is full of examples of godly men who were very wealthy. Great men of God like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Job, and David. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy per se. The problem is, based on our reading, in the love of money over and above love of the source of money and blessings. Going back to my previous question, what does following Jesus require? I would like to bring in the notion of what we call transformation. Not just conversion, but transformation. The rich young man in our story, I think, needs transformation himself. Metanoia in Greek. Not just change of perspective, change of mind, but really transformation of the According to John Paul Lederer, the one who popularizes the field of conflict transformation, the word transformation can be compared to a journey comprised of head, heart, hands, and legs and feet. By head, transformation, according to Lederer, refers to the conceptual view of a reality in terms of how we think about and therefore prepare to approach our inadequacy or our sense of brokenness. And so, transformation also requires lots of thinking, critical thinking, and reflection. That is the role of the mind here. In the head, we find the attitudes, perceptions, and orientations that we bring to creative transformation, be it personal or societal transformation. When using our head in transformation, it requires an intentional perspective and attitude, a willingness to create and nurture a horizon that provides life with a sense of direction and purpose. Lederer calls this envisioning. So if we want to see transformation within ourselves, whether as individuals or as a collective entity, we must need to use our head in terms of envisioning. How do we envision ourselves the day after, the month after, 5 years from now? By using our heart, transformation, according to Lederer, demands that we revisit our relationships, whether to things, to our wealth, or to people whom we have attachments. Figuratively, the heart is the center of our emotions, intuitions, and spiritual life. This is the place which we go out and to which we return for guidance, sustenance, and direction. Hence, according to Lederer, transformation requires a revisiting of our relationships, which represent the web of connections that form the larger context, the so-called human ecosystem from which particular issues arise and are given. And then with hands, transformation requires practice. In other words, let's do what we say. It calls for a commitment to walk the talk, to live out what we preach. We refer to our hands as that part of the body capable of building things, able to touch, feel, and affect the shape that things take. Hands, as we know, bring us to practice. I couldn't imagine living without these two hands. Hence, according to Lederer, transformation pursues the development of change processes which explicitly focus on creating positives from the difficult or negative. Transformation encourages greater understanding of underlying relational and structural patterns while building creative solutions that improve one's life and one's relationships. I think so far these three are much needed for this young man in our story. And then the legs and feet, as we know, represent the place where we touch the ground, right? Legs and feet represent the place where all our journeys hit the road. Like the hands, this is the point of action, where thought and heartbeat translate into response, direction, and momentum. Man, this is just a powerful kind of a visual, representation of transformation. Transformation, according to Lederer, will be only utopian if it is unable to be responsive to real life challenges, needs, and realities. Hence, one of the major questions transformation asks is, how do we end something not healthy, if not destructive, and build something desired? Instead of just asking the question, how do we end something not healthy? Transformation further asks, and how do we build something that's desired? Looking therefore at the situation of the rich young man from a transformational or transformative perspective suggests that on a personal level, this young man needs to think and reflect on his own intrapersonal dynamics and processes, especially when it comes to his wealth. and how this hinders him from attaining that which he truly yearns for in life. Also, he needs to maximize the potential for his growth and well-being as an individual person at physical, emotional, and spiritual levels. The rich young man in our story also needs to look at the relational aspect of transformation. He needs to maximize understanding about the dynamics between himself and those he considers important in life, those whom he values in life. He needs to bring out and work with his fears and hopes in light of his relationships with material possessions, people, and God. Perhaps transformation also requires that we, the faith community, assist this rich young man, examine, understand, and work on the structure that is the possible root causes and social conditions that made him unable to let go of his material possessions in favor of the higher order in life. I just want to make clear this perspective now, that it could be that his struggle was not just personal. It could also be structural or systemic. There's something in the system, in the larger context where he lives, perhaps, that made him find it difficult to let go of his possessions. Be it a sense of self-actualization or that which gives life more meaning and purpose, not only for his benefit, but for the common good of all. And finally, transformation calls that we take into consideration also the cultural aspect of this rich young man's existence. By identifying and understanding the cultural patterns that contribute to his too much attachment to his wealth, in light of the pain and suffering that his fellow human beings are experiencing. Perhaps there was some social pressure given his economic or political status in society. A major challenge that I see today is that because we live in a consumer-driven society, the love of money can hold us back too. Advertisements call us to advertisements call to us constantly, informing us of needs we didn't even know we had. They're being imposed on us. Things we must have for fall season. And then we condition ourselves, yes, I need those. It's difficult to maintain a proper balance while under such an assault. You may not think of it this way, but it could be considered a blessing not to have great wealth because of the additional stress it can put on our spiritual lives. I'm just celebrating here because I don't have much money. But that's really true. The Christian walk is not easy for anyone, but it is particularly hard for the wealthy in our story, especially against the backdrop of poverty, human suffering caused by hunger, famine, drought, corruption, and all forms of injustice and exploitation. By the way, how do we define wealthy from within the context of the U.S. economic standard? What is the economic bracket for people to be considered wealthy for this year? Although it is not impossible for the rich young man to enter the reign of God, it is just difficult. As our passage shows, riches do not necessarily exclude a person from the reign of God, nor is it impossible for the rich to be saved without giving up their fortune, since both Zacchaeus and Joseph of Arimathea were devoted disciples, yet were also very rich. It is just difficult, or rather more challenging. I do not know how else to interpret our passage this morning, except to say that the reign of God, which needs further elaboration, we'll do it some other time, is open to everyone. It is for all. For those who identify with the main character in our story, there is one prerequisite, and that is to experience a process of transformation, or metanoia in Greek. That is a complete turnaround of the old self and follow Christ. For today, our focus is on the wealthy. Maybe next time, we will find a similar story with the poor, the materially poor in history as the main character, and we'll see what God also requires of them to enter the reign of God. blessings to all of us. Amen.